At issue tonight, Canada-U.S. trade. Tensions are high after Donald Trump paused negotiations, angry over an Ontario ad.
We stand ready to pick up on those discussions when the United States wishes to pick up on those discussions.
Trump doesn't seem interested in talking, but the U.S. ambassador to Canada had choice words towards Ontario's Washington representative at a public event.
It's unbecoming of an ambassador. Never heard of this in my entire life.
So what's to be made of the tensions in those trade negotiations? What will a meeting, for instance, between Canada and China's leader mean for Canada's trade prospects? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it all down tonight. Chantal Hebert, Althia Raj, and in for Andrew Coyne tonight, Jason Markusoff. Thank you all for being here. Nice to see you. Let's start maybe just with a state of play, where we're at, Chantal. The fact that things are off. There was a little bit of an interaction between the president and the prime minister in South Korea, but it is very unclear where things go from here.
Yeah, well, if I raise my glass at you at the dinner table, I hope not too many people read many things into it. Okay, seriously, backroom talks are still happening. Both sides keep talking about this deal that didn't happen because of the ad. I frankly don't buy that, because the subtext, what you also hear, is how Canada wasn't flexible enough, and what you hear from the Canadian side, not from the official lines, because we are all protected from finding out exactly what is going on, but from backroom talks again, that whatever was on offer involved a list of concessions that at least one person I spoke to who is close to that said that person had warned the prime minister that the second you sign off on this is the day we become totally unpopular in Canada. So the notion that there was a great deal in the offing that got killed by this, maybe it's lucky. And why do I say that? Because clearly public opinion in the U.S. is turning against tariff, as are politicians. And that is interesting. It will take a while. It's not an instant solution, but it doesn't go the way of tariffs are great, as the president likes to say, and Americans like them.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that too, Althea. I do think the prime minister has said this before, that time is on our quote-unquote side, Canada's side. And I did wonder whether there was some slow walking happening here on purpose. Again, I have no idea what the prime minister's strategy is, but I think that that's also plausible.
Well, that was our strategy last time, but I think the Americans are onto us. I think what's telling is that I agree with Chantal. I don't believe this had anything to do with the ad. And in fact, the president suggested that the Canadians were being unreasonable and that he likes the current status quo, which is CUSMA and additional tariffs, and he is in no hurry to change things. And frankly, I don't know why we would be in such a hurry to change things either, because without auto on the table, without softwood on the table, I think there is already a narrative that is starting to be crafted, which is Mark Carney's government is willing to concede on things, whether that's the continuation of the border, defense spending, the digital service tax, the reciprocity tariffs from August, and nothing seems to emerge from it. So why would the government continue along those lines? I think in a way it was a mixed blessing for them. So I agree with Chantal.
Jason, what do you think?
A lot of Canadians were, some people may see it as a mixed blessing, but a lot of Canadians are waiting for something. Canadians in the auto sector, that's clear that we're not getting anything from this, and they seem like there's an existential crisis there for Canadians in the in the steel sector and aluminum sector. The idea of concessions and some kind of improvement was great. And if the idea was that the concession could be, more oil being sold through a Keystone pipeline or some kind of agreement there, that would have been a major boon for the province. I mean, I think that the challenge, and this is what Trump benefits from, is that people don't know what's real. 10%, this threat, is that real? Is what's to come on this? The idea of a perpetual state of uncertainty is what he thrives on. And yes, there is opportunity for Canadians to be patient, but they know that there's a long time since there's been any kind of win. They can point to it all on that, and that's going to lay in their minds as well.
I mean, I do think, I mean, maybe it was many things, but I do think it was also the ad. And I think some evidence of that is the way Ambassador Hoekstra approached the Ontario representative at that event the other night and used the F word and laid into him about it, because I guess it embarrassed the president. It at least upset him. But I don't know what you do yeah.
Seriously, it didn't at first, and then it did. And what that tells me is the ad was effective. And in the end, you're not going to win. I mean, in what universe does the U.S. ambassador give orders to Canadian lawmakers? And in what universe does that work for Canada? Yeah. The ad was obviously effective. Public opinion in the U.S., what was it, that CNN poll? 49%, 49 plus 49, Canada is a friend, minus 10, Donald Trump is doing well. At some point, you've got to decide whether you're going to spend your time kissing rings for no purpose, or whether you're going to stand up. But the notion that we should say the U.S. ambassador is now using F words, which I can use because I'm French, but I'm not going to. And that's a sign that we should just get on our knees. That sounds really demeaning. Plus, there was a poll this week that basically showed that the majority of Canadians actually think, and more than almost half of Liberals, that we're being too timid in our handling of the U.S.-Canada file. So at some point, you've got to decide who you are the prime minister to.
But does that mean we don't have to seek a resolution then, Althia? Like we just, as you said, just live with what we have for now?
I think we just need to be smart and not keep conceding on things without, like our eye should be on the big prize, which is CUSMA, and making sure that renegotiated deal gives us certainty, because the thing that is killing us at the moment is uncertainty. And whether it's the U.S. ambassador trying to make himself relevant with his F-bombs, I wasn't at the dinner, so I don't really know what happened. But to me, that's a sideshow. The president actually hurt himself by raising the ad, because then it got everybody talking about the ad on Fox News, on MSNBC, on CNN, and it made the ad much more of a target. It got lawmakers talking about the ad, and frankly, it hurt his case at the Supreme Court, because it's supposed to be about reasons and not emotions. So that makes little sense. In terms of our strategy, I'm not actually sure what our strategy is, but it seems like it would be much better to keep our eye on the big prize. And these side deals that we don't even know if Donald Trump's going to honor them, why would we concede big things on to get temporary reprieve?
Yeah, and maybe that is the strategy, because it is the Prime Minister who continues to say we have the best deal with the United States because of CUSMA and the other things. It's just the sectoral tariffs that continue to be painful. Jason?
Yeah, and he's been patient. He's not struck the deals like Korea just signed, where there remains a 15% tariff, or France or England. And what a time for Carney for Trump to have this fit of pique. And of course, one of the pieces we know about Mark Carney is his strategy is not going to fight peak with peak. But for Mark Carney to be wading into, on Friday, this meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping, at a time which is, of course, very controversial with a lot of Canadians, both in academia and in public, who are worried about the security and various other consequences of that. But when Donald Trump is showing just how irrational he is, that he will threaten to raise tariffs by 10% because he didn't like something he's heard about on TV, that many Canadians may be much more welcoming of an embrace of once seen as a pariah state.
At issue, budget politics. The Liberals will release their budget next Tuesday and are preparing Canadians for cuts.
I'm not sugarcoating it to people. Yes, we had to make tough choices.
Parties are accusing each other of trying to force an election.
We certainly hope the opposition leader will order his troops to vote for it instead of ordering the very nervous ones to vote against it and cause a very expensive Christmas election.
That member and the Prime Minister are trying to provoke a costly election on their costly budget.
So what's to be made of the politics behind the budget? Does any party really want an election? Let's bring everyone back. Chantal, Althia, and Jason Markusoff in for Andrew. Althia, I'm going to start with you. What are you hearing? Where do you think things stand?
Well, to answer your question, does anybody want an election? Generally speaking, no. Is there the threat of an election? Yes. Are the numbers there for the Liberals? Yes, if they want it. The Conservatives don't actually want an election, but they believe that their membership do, and so they will vote against it, though Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, was pretty clear, interestingly, that he didn't give, a clear answer when he was asked if all of his members were going to be at the vote and be voting against it. So that's worth noting. The NDP caucus is really split, but they don't have that much to lose. They could abstain, but if there are lots of cuts, as we keep hearing that there are, if there's a lot of job losses, I can't see how the NDP votes for this budget. The best likely scenario is that the Bloc supports the budget, which frankly was always the best likely scenario. No, but it was. If they had started talking to the Bloc in the summer, because Yves-François Blanchet told them after the election, this is a moment that calls for us to collaborate and work together. And if we all put our partisanship aside, I'm willing to work cooperatively. Let's talk. And the Liberals did not talk to him.
Yeah.
And then, I'm sorry to say, but the House leader, the Liberal House leader, Steve McKinnon, basically used his pulpit to insult the Bloc repeatedly. So why would they want to support him? And so they poisoned the relationships. But that was still the best case scenario for them, the easy for the picking votes, if you wish. So they're in a bit of a pickle, but I do think that they are individual members that they could go out and get those 3 missing votes. Starting with, of course, Elizabeth May, who has said very clearly that if there's no fossil fuel subsidies, she's willing to vote for the budget, assuming there's no poison pill for her. So, the other problem, though, is that a lot of Liberals actually think that there is a strategic advantage of going now, because it will never look rosier than it is now. And if Mark Carney wants his majority, and he seems to be governing as if he has one, maybe they should start planning for one. And frankly, they have started planning for one.
Okay, I'm going to get Chantal, and then Jason, I'll get your take from a little further away. Chantal.
The Bloc will not support the budget, and even by late summer, they did warn the government that it wasn't on. And those 18 conditions, 6 of which are non-negotiable, are basically meant to say we are not going to support the budget. François Blanchet wants to go to the polls before a possible PQ win in Quebec City, which would complicate his own life and leave him vulnerable if we end up in a referendum, yes, no kind of environment. The problem the opposition has, the NDP and the Conservatives, there's a Petula Clark French song that says everyone wants to go to heaven, but no one wants to die. And that's basically where they are. They would all want to oppose the budget, but neither of them really want an election. And I think of the two parties, the NDP probably is less adverse to an election because they figure they can hang on to their 7 seats. If they did last time, they can do it again and maybe add a few more. The Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre have to be worried, looking at the numbers, that this would terminate Pierre Poilievre's career. Forget that leadership review. But at some point, something is going to have to give, and there is an extra danger here. What if they all decide to go to heaven on budget day by saying we oppose this budget, thinking that they're not going to have to die because they will keep people away on the vote? If you were the prime minister, you could, on the basis of those statements on budget day, go to the governor general and say the main opposition parties do not want to support the budget, and so I'm asking you to dissolve this parliament because I don't have the support of the opposition for my budget, without going to the vote. And that is a risk, because I do believe that the notion that it would be that the Liberals actually should want a majority and are increasingly thinking that they can get one is a dangerous one for the opposition parties as they try to call everybody else's bluff.
Okay, Jason. So, like, if I was a Canadian listening to this, I would not be thrilled. I don't know that Canadians have the appetite for another election, or even want to contemplate that this is happening. What do you think?
And the parties all know that. They know that one of the, if we wound up an election, they'd have to make sure they can properly blame the other guys. Nobody is going to want to be blamed for the election. It's not that you necessarily, lose the election because they blame you, but it certainly hurts you at the start of an election that happens. But right now, these parties, there's no real downside at this point to bluffing, to revealing their hand. Everybody wants to strengthen their hand, have the highest negotiating hand, certainly until the Liberals play their cards, which is the budget, which will test, which could test what the country's pain threshold is for size of deficit. We're at an interesting point now where Pierre Poilievre seems to be okay if the deficit is a mere $42 billion, which is an interesting political place to be. And, what the country's pain tolerance is for spending cuts with all these warnings, bringing down the boom, that there's going to be some kind of sacrifices, some kind of hardships for Canadians of various colors. But until they see that, there's no real point in saying where you're going to go or what you're going to do for the opposition parties.
Last 30 seconds or so to you there, Althia.
I think the fact that you're both suggesting that the Canadians don't want to have an election should give the Liberals pause, frankly, because they win when voter turnout is high. And in the spring, you had people very worried about Donald Trump and his threats about the 51st state, and you don't have that anymore. And so if you get into this feeling of complacency, the Liberals might think, the polling numbers are great in Quebec, Ontario, and Atlantic Canada. But if there's nothing mobilizing people to the polls, they should be far less comfortable than the polls suggest they are.
Particularly if it were to happen over the holiday period. So I'm just going to pretend that this conversation hasn't happened. At issue, Alberta and the notwithstanding clause. The UCP government is defending its use of the clause to force teachers back to work.
This notwithstanding clause is part of our Constitution. And part of the reason why it's there is that sometimes there are a lot of different interests that have to be mediated. And those interests have to be mediated by elected politicians.
So what's to be made of the use of the notwithstanding clause in this case? Does it add to concerns over some people say, the overuse of this from time to time? Chantal, Althia, and Jason, join me again. Chantal, I wanted to talk about this, first of all, because you guys all like talking about it, but also because it is part of a bigger conversation happening right now when it comes to the notwithstanding clause and Quebec's use of it, but also Doug Ford's use of it. What do you make of Alberta's decision here?
Well, it's part of a pattern. Increasingly, provincial governments and maybe a Pierre Poilievre-run federal government would use the clause rather routinely. And the more you use it, basically what you're saying is we have a Charter of Rights and Freedom, but when it's convenient, we use it preemptively. We don't even wait for courts to say your law is unconstitutional because it's protected from a challenge based on the Charter. But all this only will get resolved one way or another when the Supreme Court hears the challenge to Quebec's secularism legislation, which involves arguments from the provinces, pro and cons, and the federal government against, about whether you should be using the notwithstanding clause preemptively, whether you should use it repeatedly, and what that does to the Charter of Rights. And I, for one, cannot tell you what the Supreme Court will say about this, because the only time it did opine on the use of the clause, it basically reinforced or said the way the provinces are using it now is totally constitutional.
Jason, I should also preface this by saying your wife is a teacher, but that doesn't mean you can't talk about the notwithstanding clause. But give me your take of what's happening here and how it plays into what Chantal's talking about, sort of the broader conversation around this.
I think back to last year when Danielle Smith made a big show as Premier of tabling an expanded Bill of Rights to give a whole bunch of new Alberta Bill of Rights. We already had one, but she beefed it up with special protections for the right to not be vaccinated, the right to bear arms, or the right to safely hold guns, right for private property. And she was talking in the legislature about how sacrosanct and immutable rights are. She seems to have had a change of mind this year. If this quashing of a teacher strike by using the notwithstanding clause stokes a discussion about whether premiers are overusing the clause, just wait for the coming weeks, where it's speculated and the government has suggested that they're going to be using it 3 more times with regards to some of their past legislation on transgender youth and education rights.
Althia.
So I think we need to be really clear that she did not need to use the notwithstanding clause. The UCP government could have sent the teachers back to schools and forced them into binding arbitration. Mm-hmm. There are dispute resolution boards in Alberta. There's 3 other avenues that she could have pursued to send the teachers back to the classroom. And she chose not to do this. The bill is draconian. It bans strikes for 3 years. It prevents arbitration boards from even weighing on whether or not it impedes on rights. To Jason's point, it doesn't just use the notwithstanding clause, but it says the Alberta Bill of Rights and the Human Rights Act are not applicable to this law. It's really quite something. What is most concerning is that, we've also seen very recently in Quebec with its Constitution Act of 2025, Bill 1, also basically saying that its bill is not subject to the Canadian Constitution and the notwithstanding clause and charter rights, is that we're normalizing the use of the notwithstanding clause. Yeah. So it becomes less, frankly, newsworthy that premiers are using it. This is not normal. We should not normalize the use of politicians breaching rights. They should have to justify why they are digging into this tool in their toolbox. And by constantly using it, they don't need to do that more and more and more. And then there are fewer and fewer checks on their power. And we need to ask ourselves, who does that serve? Mm-hmm. In the last 3 years, in 2022, Doug Ford basically tried to do this, and there was an outcry. And that outcry is kind of more like a murmur in Alberta this time around. Mm-hmm. And that perhaps is a reflection of how frequently premiers across this country have decided to invoke the clause or threaten to invoke the clause.
It would be that, but another big factor in the Alberta case is that we're just not the same. We don't have the same unionization rates or the same belief or public support for labor. So when there was threat of a general strike, in the case of Rob Ford using it, that really cowed him. In Alberta, people may be riding with the teachers, maybe supporting the teachers in their dispute with the province, but do they support the labor movement in general here? Not so much.
Okay.
But it's more than a labor movement. This is not. Yeah. This is wider than just what is part of the collective agreement with the teachers and whether or not you support the teachers. This is a much bigger deal.
I agree.
Last word, Chantal. Last word.
But on that basis, at this point, the only recourse on this, especially if public opinion, as Jason states in Alberta or in Quebec, does not rise up against it, is whether the Supreme Court believes that it should put some frames around it. I don't know that that will happen, but it is a very significant case for the balance between the rule of law and political and parliamentary power in this country.
Thank you all for being here. Jason, thank you for stepping in. That's at issue for this week. We're getting ready for the budget on Tuesday, and we do want to hear from you about sacrifices you're making to pay the bills, concerns you have about your jobs, whether you've changed plans of any kind because of the state of the economy. Send us your questions and thoughts to ask@cbc.ca. I'm Rosemary Barton. Thank you for watching.